At the resurrection of the dead, you realize not one person there will own land or a house. Not one living Christian in God's church will still have a land or a house. As a matter of fact, we will have decided 3 years and 8.5 months earlier to leave our houses and our lands. You're going to have to leave your dwelling, your house. You're going to have to give it up. So the question is, will you give it up earlier? Take a look at what you have. Gold, silver, 401ks, stocks, coins, stamps, paintings, antiques, equity. What do you have that you don't need? Continue your lifestyle. Don't leave yourself with no clothes standing out in an intersection without food in your stomach or a house. There are ways to do this, and you may need counsel. But there are a lot of things you can get rid of. If you want to give, call us with a number and an approximate date. Mr. Armstrong once asked the church to go out and borrow money and then repay it and give it back. Some of you may want to do that. You may want to go borrow money knowing that you can pay it back. That's fine. We are absolutely on a time crunch to get into people's lives with the truth of the kingdom of God. When people come to talk to our ministers now, our ministers are not going to tell them, go slow, think about it. No, this is a doctrine. This is a command of God. This is what Jesus Christ said. I will close by announcing super funding has come. Good night.
Hello, and welcome back to How It's Done TV. Today, we are going to do episode 5 of the Restored Church of God series. We're just going to be going over some updates, not so much like an interview, a chat with Mark. And we're just going to go over some stuff and kind of update you guys how things are going. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Don, for having me.
So we have had an introduction of the Unchosen Worldwide Church of God podcast, which is very interesting because they've had a variety of different guests on there. And I know that they've talked about some stuff that you haven't heard before. So how do you feel about that podcast, and especially somebody talking about the Restored Church of God on everything that we've talked about?
The podcast itself is quite interesting, by Dr. Tricia Jenkins, who was a member of the Worldwide Church of God. She grew up in WCG when Herbert Armstrong was around, and then has now become a doctor and wanted to shed light on what was happening in worldwide. And so the podcast is interviewing a variety of people that actually attended around the time she did, and some people she even loosely knew. And it's all about spreading awareness about what the Worldwide Church of God was teaching, but more so what it was like to be inside the Worldwide Church of God and how that had affected their lives. And different people have different ranges of how they coped with the difficulties of it. If people had a wonderful, fantastic experience, then that would be a pretty boring podcast. But she found people who, made something of their lives and have a unique perspective to shed the light on the Worldwide Church of God and his teachings.
I did. I found it very interesting because a lot of people haven't come forward, and spoken in depth about Worldwide Church of God, the other cogs. And now we have a second person for the Restored Church of God that's come forward, Kevin 𝗪𝗍, and his episode, it just shadowed everything that you've talked about, and more clarification, because he was up there in rank, wasn't he?
Yes, Kevin 𝗪𝗍 was raised to the rank of evangelist inside the Restored Church of God. And it's interesting because out of all the podcasts that she has thus aired, his was the first one where it was actually talking about a church that was not the Worldwide Church of God. It was a splinter or an offshoot, which is what they call them, of the Worldwide Church of God. So Kevin was a minister inside the Restored Church of God. When I knew him, he was Mr. Kevin 𝗪𝗍. He's still a good friend to this day. He and his wife left in 2016. I left in 2021, and we reconnected after that. And Kevin, gave his interview, and he talked about a lot of the same points that we have already covered in the past interviews. And so I found it very interesting that there was a pattern of the things that Kevin talked about. He talked about tithing, he talked about common, he talked about David 𝗪𝗂𝗃, the pastor general of the Restored Church of God, all the biblical titles he was taking for himself, seeing himself in the Bible everywhere. And then he also talked about all the failed prophecy.
Yeah.
Which,
now, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Excuse me for not knowing, and I'm sure if I don't know, there's others. What is rank of evangelist? I don't understand that.
In God's government, as laid out in the New Testament, there's ranks. The highest would be an apostle, and then a prophet, evangelist, pastor, ministers, deacons. And so there's kind of a hierarchy within God's government, and that is all completely biblical. What David 𝗪𝗂𝗃 has done, he declared himself an apostle.
The highest.
The highest, of course.
Okay.
Why would you declare yourself in the middle? He says he's an apostle, and then for a while he was a prophet, but he walked that back more recently. He's not a prophet. And so what he did was, there was another man named Jeff who was also raised as an evangelist. And so what 𝗪𝗪𝗃 was trying to do, and which I think he's still doing today, is validating that his church, the Restored Church of God, has the valid God's government structure as laid out in the New Testament.
Okay.
And he seemed to get tired of having an apostle way up here and just, lowly preaching elders way down here. He needed to fill the gap in between. And so he raised two men at the same time. One of them was Kevin, and the other one was this gentleman, Jeff. And those were the two evangelists. And Dave was tickled pink when he did that, because he started teasing about whether or not those two men would wind up being the two witnesses. Well, both of those men have left. And so those two witnesses theory went away. And then he raised another man. His name is Brad Schleifer, who currently is at the Restored Church of God, who has the rank of evangelist. And I'm planning to do an article about the role of an evangelist inside the Restored Church of God, to find out from David 𝗪𝗃's own literature what worldwide taught, but then also what's in the New Testament. Are they really evangelists? Were they really evangelists?
Okay.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. Now, clarification for those who don't know Kevin, and since I've gotten to see his Facebook page, he's a really funny guy, and his wife is the daughter of David 𝗪𝗪𝗃. And another thing is, I've been asked a lot, why do we always say David 𝗪𝗃𝗃?
Because if you just say 𝗪𝗃𝗃, there's a member of the band 𝗪𝗏𝗡 that if you just type in 𝗪𝗪𝗃, he will pop up. And I'm sure if I ever had a beer with that guy, he'd say, oh man, this David 𝗪𝗃𝗃 is plaguing me. People write me and think it's him. So I'm very specific about David 𝗪𝗃𝗃 versus 𝗪𝗃𝗃, because 𝗪𝗃𝗃 is 𝗪𝗏𝗡, the band 𝗪𝗏𝗡. So he's also famous. So if you type in David 𝗪𝗃𝗃 when you're Googling, you'll get more accurate results.
See, there's your explanation.
Yeah.
So basically, my take on it, being an outsider, is that Kevin and Jennifer leaving was not a small thing. It was a pretty big deal for them to decide and leave. And what was your take on that?
It was a very interesting time. It was the biggest departure from the Restored Church of God in its history since 1999. Men and women families have been leaving forever. But that was 𝗪𝗪𝗃's own son-in-law and his daughter. And she worked in the accounting office, and he was an evangelist. He was the highest ranking, right underneath, quote, Mr. 𝗃 at the time. So for the family to leave and such a high value member to leave, that rocked the church. And I remember being completely shocked by it. And we got called into a staff meeting. I believe it was on a Friday. And we're told, they left the church and blah, blah, blah. And it was just like, wow, I can't believe why would they leave? What happened? So it was a very big departure. And then as time went on, more and more people of high profile would leave, and it became less and less like, oh, wow, what's going on? It just kind of like, oh, just they left too.
No.
So they were the first big deal, because the Denise were what I would consider the royal family inside the Restored Church of God.
You hear that, Kevin? Royal family.
He knows. He was part of the royal family. The Denise are there. His brother is the last one who's still there. His oldest brother was not there. His middle brother, who's older than Kevin is, he is still there with his family to this.
So he really has his family immersed in there. And there's a lot of people who have a hard time leaving because, their family's still in there and they don't know what's going to happen when they leave.
Right. When your whole family is attending, it's harder to pull away. Sometimes families come and go together, but when they either trickle in apart from each other or trickle out apart from each other, that creates some interesting dynamics within the family structure. So, for Kevin and Jennifer to leave, that was you'd call it a courageous act on their part, because they knew people would be upset by it. They knew that it would create difficulties. Jennifer knew how her dad would react as a pastor in the church and what the kind of things he would say both publicly and privately. And they had to weigh all that, but they had kids.
Yes. And I know that they had reasons.
Looking out for them.
I know that they had reasons why they left, but I think that the ultimate one is they were thinking about their kids,
Sure.
and I know that social media doesn't say the whole truth of everything, but they do. They look really happy. And
oh yeah, they're doing wonderful. They're doing wonderfully well right now, and it's really great. And I consider Kevin a good friend. We have breakfast, me and a group of other guys. We have breakfast every couple of weeks. He's a real person. And it's wonderful to watch his journey of healing that he's had to go on. I mean, when people leave a splinter or leave a Church of God, whatever, when your religious foundation is rocked, there is a certain amount of healing that has to happen, because it's damaging to leave. I mean, you're damaged and you're leaving because you've been damaged, but there's, the aftermath of coping and adjusting that Kevin was doing. And I see his involvement in the podcast as part of his road of healing, to actually come out publicly and more publicly discuss his experiences, his feelings about it. I mean, he'd been blogging a little bit here and there for years, but nothing quite on the scale of that interview with Dr. Jenkins.
What I found interesting is that he talked about Common, and there was a clip that I want to get and insert in here. To hear David Pack talk about it, it kind of I was appalled, to be quite honest. And he also talked about, the titles that Pack gave himself and the prophecies, and wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons that Kevin and Jennifer had to leave, and that was even back in 2016. Everybody can stand as much as they can stand, and you think, okay, well, maybe this time he'll be right when he sets a date for the return of Jesus Christ. Maybe this time he'll be right. Maybe this time he'll be right. And he's been setting dates like almost every 2 weeks since May of this year in 2022. And in fact, today is 𝗪𝗠, which just this week he revisited and said, this is potentially the day of the kingdom of God arriving. But then he said, well, it could be Friday, it could be Saturday, it could be Sunday, it could be Monday. It's like, well, yeah, it could be. I mean, Baptist ministers say Christ could come. So where's the specialness of God's message? But Kevin and Jennifer leaving back in 2016, when titles started to happen, when Dave Pack declared that he was Elijah, the prophet, and then that prophet is not, Jesus Christ. They had had enough. And that's a hard decision to make when it's your family, when it's your dad up at the lectern, when it's your father-in-law, when it's the grandparent of your children. That's a hard decision to make.
Now, I know that he went through a healing journey, and this has kind of been a healing journey for you. A lot of people are kind of like, why don't people just flood coming forward? And also, how can people allow somebody like Pack to control their lives? And it's kind of like, you have to remember, you wouldn't say that to somebody in domestic violence. Those have been through PTSD through war. I mean, there are certain situations that you're just trying to do the best that you can, and it ends up happening. His healing journey, if you could talk a little bit about that. But you have started yours, because you've been out for a year and just finally have been talking about it.
Yeah, everybody heals in their different ways and different rates. Some people, the best thing for them to do is never talk about it again with anybody, with family and friends, and just kind of bottle up all those feelings, which, you know, they're all there and those difficulties are there. And anybody who goes through any kind of trauma, regardless of how severe, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, you know, you need to heal and get past it. And so when people come out of a church, let's say for Restored Church of God, but then don't talk about it, it's, are you dealing with it or are you just denying it? And so some people, you know, leave a church organization and don't talk for 20 years, and yet you sit and have a beer with them and that they'll still talk about it. And it's like they never quite got over it. And I think it's been really great to actually know Kevin personally, but also see what he's released publicly about his journey. And it took him a long time to realize, you know, I've hurt, and now what am I going to do about it? For the sake of my wife and the sake of my family, I have to move on, move past it. And I think he's made great strides, you know, by doing what he's doing. If people choose not to talk about it, then that's up to them. I mean, I can't get anybody else to reach out to you to also be interviewed. And, you know, that's, everybody's got their own path and own way of doing it. And some people have said, well, I'm not sure if I'm ready. And it's like, well, then don't talk till you're ready. Kevin was ready to talk publicly, and I've been ready to talk. When I left Restored Church of God, I waited almost a whole year before I spoke to anybody. I wrote something on a blog once answering a question for the first time in September of 2021. And that kind of snowballed into me having a website today, but that all just began. And I didn't know, and I wasn't planning on doing it. I didn't think of it about, oh, this is my healing journey, because that sounds kind of hokey. But in reality, being able to express what's happened, share with others what's happened, has been very cathartic. And it began with, on the Banned by HWA website in September 2021, I responded in the comments section to somebody. And the next time I went back to the page, it was on the front page of the blog. And I'm like, whoa, my stuff. If I'd known it would be on the front page, I would have paid more attention to my punctuation and grammar. And then some time went on, and then a couple months later, then I wrote again, and then in the comment section only. And then again, it wound up on the front page. And I'm like, wow. And then I finally contacted the owner of the website. His name is Gary. And he said, hey, man, anytime you write something, I'll put it up. And I'm like, oh, really? Okay. So a good friend of mine was still in the church, and he was actually in the ministerial training program. So I wasn't ready to talk publicly about it. And I wasn't ready to start doing it in a regular basis until he left. And then the first thing I did was go on the private Facebook group in Wadsworth and say, I'm a former member and former employee of Restored Church of God. Anybody have questions? And that's how you and I actually connected. The floodgates that weekend. And people thought I was trolling because, you know, I put my phone down for an hour and a half and didn't check it. And I look up and everything's exploded, and like, you're not answering questions. And I'm like, oh,
now, were you aware of all the posts over the years on Facebook about Restored Church of God in Wadsworth?
I had heard about a group in Wadsworth on Facebook talking about it, because the ministers monitor that. They're actually even on it.
You hear that Wadsworth neighbors were being monitored.
Well, they're neighbors too. So there's no, it's legitimate for them to be a part of it. But I would hear for years like, oh yeah, on the Facebook group, they say this, the Facebook group, they say that. And I never knew what that was until I left, and then saw that there was a private Wadsworth neighbors group. And then once I joined, I'm like, oh, this is the thing they're all talking about. And then when I went on there and made my comment, it kind of, things exploded, but I was more interested in answering questions and giving information of the truth, not to bash RCG. That's never been my goal. I'm not standing up for the truth. I'm not taking them down. I'm not, oh, I'm going to get that guy. It's nothing like that at all. It's more about shedding a light on the reality of what's going on. And people had a lot of questions about the front gate. The front gate. What a
That's
incredible
why
mystery
I contacted you, because I knew some stuff was probably true, but I knew that there was a lot of just fairy tales, and I wanted to get a lot of that stuff answered.
Sure.
Majorly because people assumed that there was underage marriage, which is illegal.
Right.
They assumed that there was armed guards running people off the property, that there was an army, just a lot of crazy stuff. And the other thing is because they are secretive, they don't really get out in the public like all the other churches do. So you were a great outlet just to answer a bunch of that.
Yeah, I wound up spending my time more defending the Restored Church of God than criticizing them, only because people had some very, I would consider, odd ideas. And it's just rumor upon rumor upon rumor. When that, campus is there for 5-6 years across from the Giant Eagle, people talk. And somebody will say something, and then another person will hear it and think it's fact. And a lot of times it wasn't fact. Some of it was true, just distorted. So the whole point of doing that was to come forward and just say, hey, if you want an answer, I'm willing to give it to you. And from there, I started writing on the blog, the HWA band blog, more frequently, and then started counting on writing things just for that to be posted. And then somebody has privately that I for my own Facebook group. I'm like, oh, I don't want to deal with that. But then one day I realized I need greater control of the information and how it's going out, when it's going out. And so I just looked into Squarespace, and I'd heard about Squarespace for years, of a website that helps you build websites, and for people who have no experience. And I have no experience with websites. And I just played around one afternoon, and after a couple hours, I had a website. I'm like, wow, okay, let's go ahead and do this. And I looked up the domain, which is 𝗪𝗧𝗪.org, and it was $12. I'm like, I got $12. So within a couple of days, I had a website up and running, and it's now been going on for about 5 weeks, 𝗪𝗧𝗪.org. And now I write regularly on that website, but also share the information with Banned by HWA, because they've been very supportive, and they'll cross post and then link to my website, and we kind of promote each other.
But I noticed that there is, when working on doing a documentary of Herbert Armstrong all the way through RCG, there is a timeline. There's so much information on Herbert Armstrong, but there hasn't really been a timeline for David C. Pack, starting from when things kind of got skewed to now. And you have been documenting that. And I think that if there's former members out there and current members that are still, I don't know, kind of in the dark, or having a hard time realizing what has been going on, you can't deny that timeline that you have made. I mean, you can't. It's from his own words.
Yeah, the whole central point for the website, and why I wanted to do more than a Facebook group, was create a central hub of information that all things Restored Church of God. The HWA band website I followed for years, for over 10 years, but it's more about the culture of all the churches of God, Living, United, 𝗪𝗃, Philadelphia, RCG, among all the others. And I wanted to have something that was more focused towards RCG, because that's what I knew. That's what my experience was. And the reason the information is on the website of what I have, and you say timeline and just kind of a list of dates, or dates stated throughout articles, was that for my own sanity inside the Restored Church of God, I would sit there and go, wow, I feel like I heard this before. And so then I started going back to older sermons and like, wait a second, he did say this before. He said this 2 years ago. I'm like, that's why it was familiar. And then I started to, for my own personal use, started collecting quotes, and then I put them into categories, and it's like, okay, he's invoking God's name here again. Okay, he's saying it's Pentecost again. Okay, he's saying he's pastored more people than any human being on the face of the earth again. And so when you have those kind of quotes plucked out and organized in a very succinct way, I think it makes a powerful case for the pattern that you're witnessing, that you're not imagining it. And before my exit to the Restored Church of God, when I would have doubts about, wow, what am I doing? I would go revisit those quotes. There was kind of a re-remembering and a re-proving that I'm not making all this up, that it's not that I can't wait to go out and sin, or that I hate God, or God isn't real, or I don't believe the Bible, or I just don't like waiting, I'm impatient. It's like, no, there's proven facts of history that show that David C. Pack is a false apostle and a false prophet. He can say he's not a prophet anymore, but even in his own literature, he says you don't have to declare yourself a prophet to be a prophet, be a false one. So I'm kind of using his own words against him now. Like what's been going on the last couple of weeks or couple of months now since May is he will tell everybody now is the time. Give in your common, sell all now. You're going to lose your eternal life if you don't, because May 15th is the day and you're going to miss that deadline. Okay,
And
May
then
30th is the day.
recently,
June 5th is
𝗪𝗧𝗠?
the day. I'm sorry?
And recently 𝗪𝗧𝗠?
Tammuz.
Tammuz. Oh,
That's so adorable the way you said it. I'm going to start pronouncing it Tammuz. Wait, what did you say? Did you say that again?
Tammuz.
That's so cute. Yeah, Tammuz was the big deal, which just passed. Today is Av 1, ironically enough. And that's just, these are all Hebrew months for people. Tammuz, Iyar, Tishri, Av. Those are all Hebrew months, and 𝗪𝗃 will set a date and then absolutely prove for hour upon hour that it's this date until it gets right before then. And then he changes his mind and like, oh, God showed me it wasn't true. And so what I've been doing, he's adamant about the next date. Quote you how he's been adamant about all the other dates just as equally, because if you forget those things, if you forget the past, if you forget the history of what he's already said, you might just believe him this time. Except, wow, he's only said this 155 times before. And at what point does a rational human being say, I can't believe you anymore? And I got to that point for years, but then having the quotes, having the website, to let people know who are either in or thinking about going in, this is what he said before. I'm not making it up. And I can feel really good about the website as far as there's two principles that I've held to that I promised myself that I would do. Number one, I would speak the truth. I'm not making anything up and I'm not lying. It's like, if I'm a liar, then you should get away from me. And then number two is not to attack anyone there personally. I may poke fun and like, oh, kind of, ha ha ha, kind of in a light, fun way, tease, like, like a brother would tease his brother or sister. But I won't attack people personally. I don't attack 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗪. And even when I have personal stories about him or his wife, who I adore, I'm not going to say that story. That's not for me. And that's not the point. The human being is not the point. It's the minister preaching. It's the false apostle. It's how he is hurting as a minister, as a false apostle, all the people inside the restored Church of God. It's hurting them.
I mean, mentally, isn't it draining to constantly be given a date and it comes and goes? And then it's again, and it's like this up and down. And Herbert Armstrong, didn't he do a date once, but then after that, he never gave any specific?
As far as I remember, there was a booklet called 1975 in Prophecy, or was an article. Dennis Deal could speak more accurately about that. But there was a date in the 70s that people assumed, because Herbert Armstrong always used the terminology, within 15 years, within 20 years, there'll be nuclear war, there'll be this, the beast will rise. He was very broad and generic, saying that somewhere off in the far future. And 𝗪𝗃 took that ball and ran with it and actually started setting dates. And the first date he set was in Elul, which is another month, in 2013. And that was right when I came in the Restored Church of God. And I remember thinking, and I think one of your comments was, the ups and downs. It's only up and down if you believe it and build up your hope. You get disappointed, then you get your hope, and then you get disappointed, and you get your hope, and you get your disappointed. And some people don't ever break out of that cycle, but like I did, and some of my friends who left, and actually probably the people that are still there, your only mental coping mechanism has to be at a point, I don't believe this anymore. I'm not going to get excited about it. If it happens, great. I'm all willing to have Christ come. That would be so wonderful. But I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. I'm not going to get all excited about it. And I'm not going to empty my bank account because it's yet another date that 𝗪𝗃 sets. So the coping mechanism is to just disbelieve him. And I'm almost convinced that, because I cannot imagine people a majority of people inside the Restored Church of God still getting excited when he sets a date. Although I've heard from sources who have friends that there are people like that are still there. They're still there. They're still excited. Oh, I can hardly wait. It's so wonderful. I couldn't sleep last night. It's like, you poor person. What is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? Why would you believe him? He's been wrong 100 times. Is he going to be right that 101st time? And you're still excited about that? The problem is that people who get excited, and a good friend of mine, his parents used to get excited. Once the family left, the depression they felt afterwards, because the cycle of hope is over, and it's like, well, now what do I do? And I found that from talking with friends and family members, the people that are most damaged by what's been going on, outside of the people closest to 𝗪𝗠𝗂𝗃, those people are damaged the most. But people who are just members and leave, the ones that got excited and had that continual cycle of up and down are the ones that have the hardest time coping after they leave. The people who are like, I stopped believing him years ago, are far better off after they leave than those that get excited.
Now, you talked about, giving more money. In that podcast was played Pack talking about handing over, because what's the point when Jesus comes? And he
right.
really pushed that. And you did an article in regards to being worried about him.
Oh, yeah. Well, okay, there's two things to unpack there. The quotes you're talking about that we're using in the podcast were from a sermon called The Clarion Call. And that was delivered back in 2007. And that was to help build the campus. And the whole point of Common is to perpetuate the campus, to upkeep the campus. It is not about preaching the gospel of the kingdom of God. So tithes and offerings can do that with what limited work RCG actually does. So Common, which came after Clarion Call being the sermon, Common being the doctrine in the book of Acts, where it says you give all. Well, what is all? To all, some people is their summer home. To some, all is do I sell my house and rent a room? And that's different to different people. So there's that part of things. And I forgot the second part of your question. Common, and then how he had that basic kind of, I don't know if you called it like a meltdown or my concern
kind of changing, but it wasn't
right.
But it wasn't like attacking him. And
right.
Just to get that out, I didn't take it as attacking him. You were just generally concerned about somebody's behavior and if they're okay.
Yes, thank you. I wrote a recent article where I actually genuinely expressed concern for 𝗪𝗠𝗂𝗃's well-being, because I've watched the man over the years and I'm seeing greater and greater patterns of him cracking. He is not as composed as he used to be. Some of his thoughts and how he says things, and it's very subtle, except when you're paying attention and you kind of draw the lines of the patterns. And look, 𝗪𝗠𝗃 was nice to me. I don't have any personal horror stories about what an awful human being he was. Some people do. I don't have that story to tell. He was nice to me. I've been to his house. He had a barbecue one time for the staff. And that was really wonderful once. So I don't hate the man. I may attack his policies, attack his teachings, attack, what he does to people, but I don't attack him personally. I always liked the guy. But watching him kind of wishy-washy, go back and forth, declare that he is Elijah, then he's not, then he is Elijah, then he's not, then he will be Elijah, he's already been Elijah, he's not Elijah the prophet. It's like, what is going on over there? And I was genuinely concerned for him. So in a kind of half really serious, but then also with a little bit of humor thrown in there, asking people to check in on him, because what's wrong with this man? Is he breaking up? Because if you see the way he is in the sermons, I'm like, this is at the front of the room. who knows what's going on at the third floor behind closed doors? People the closest to him are the ones that really know whether or not he's holding it together or are all the screws falling loose. And so I wrote an article which basically says, check in on him. I'm worried about him. But then, of course, within that week, he's so adamant and back to his full force of, this is right and I know I'm right. I kind of said, wow, that was stupid of me. But at the same time, it's like, well, okay, what he's doing is crazy and wild, and the things that he says are just biblically not true, and history proves him to be a fraud. History proves 𝗪𝗪𝗂𝗃 to be a biblical fraud, because if he was true, then at least one of the things he predicted would, or has taught that would happen. But at the same time, it's like, I don't hate the guy. I have no anger in my heart towards him. I just get frustrated when I think about the people who are still there that I see in the audience, and I'm like, dude, how are you still buying that? How are you still sitting there? And it's like, well, you know what? I sat there for years, and I sat there thinking, I got to get out of here. This is crazy, or I don't believe this. And maybe that's what people are doing while they're there. So I expressed concern for him, but at the same time, now I'm like, I can't do anything. And not that I really expected people in RCG like Brad Schleifer, Dr. Tim Ranney, to go in the office the door, I just want to make sure you're okay. But you know what? If they did, great. But I don't think it makes a difference. The man is on a freight train going downhill. The tracks are greased. The brakes are gone. He's just going to power forward no matter what. Come hell or high water, nobody's going to get in his way. And so if that's the way he is, then that's fine. But at the same time, allowing yourself, when you're a critique of, when you criticize something, when you critique it, when you analyze it, I think having a heart is very important, because I think people who read any of my articles, that I put so much humor in it, I'm having fun with it, but I'm also pointing out the facts. But at the same time, I care about these people.
But you're not getting sued, right? Because there was an article people got confused about.
Yeah, I wrote that was completely satire, that 𝗪𝗪𝗂𝗃 was suing someone, but I never said it was me. And the article clearly shows that 𝗪𝗪𝗃 today would sue 𝗪𝗪𝗃 from 5 years ago, because again, I used his own words against him. All I did was quote him talking about him, because he became what he warned people for years in the Restored Church of God. He warned people about certain men, certain ministers, certain things that would happen. And he has actually become a personification of his own worst fear, or his biggest enemy. And I just point that out.
Now, you also did, I don't want to say I was shocked, but you did an article on a current hierarchy minister that it's in RCG, and
3 now.
You weren't mean about it. You weren't slandering him, but you were very firm. And you want to elaborate?
Yeah. So at first, my focus was going to solely be about 𝗪𝗪𝗃. But as I was analyzing sermons and articles, and knowing the culture there and knowing the people there very well, he cannot operate in a vacuum. The man only has power because the people there at headquarters in Wadsworth, Ohio, let him have the power. As a corporate entity, the board of directors could vote him out. And corporately speaking, it's legal and possible. They get a quorum of votes and vote him out, and he's gone, and that's it. But they don't do that. And so I kind of fell into a situation where I was given a Bible study by my former manager, Mr. Bradford G. Schleifer, who's a really nice guy. I had a lot of great conversations with him. He counseled with me when I became the manager of MPS, Media Production Services. I have a lot of good personal, I've eaten at his house. His wife is a tremendous cook. They're nice people. His son is adorable. I mean, they're good people. They're nice people. But Brad Schleifer, who's currently the last evangelist in the Restored Church of God, is also what I call the enabler in chief. He's the one that helps support 𝗪𝗪𝗃 the most. And so I came into this conclusion that, like, wow, if I'm going to talk about what's wrong in RCG, I can no longer keep denying that there are men at the top who are in the third floor in the hierarchy and in the structure that actually support 𝗪𝗧𝗏 and give him credibility. Give credibility to Dave himself and credibility to those in the church. And so when you have a man who's surrounded by a bunch of enablers, it becomes almost unfair, or I don't want to say cowardly, but it just became like, do I really need to shy away from that because I have personal connections with these people that I'm now having to basically out? And so now I've written three different men on the website I've written about. Bradford G. Schleifer, who's basically running RCG underneath David Pack. He runs the day-to-day. I mean, if Brad ever left, that place might fall apart. He knows everything about everything. Very smart, good guy, good sense of humor.
But he supports the common.
Oh, he supports everything. And that's the problem. And so I had to write an article about him. Another one was Edward L. Winkfield, who became my manager when the departments were merged right before I left, and helped run the department into the ground. And I watched its demise while it was happening. And again, had dinner in his house. He's a nice man. We had a good personal relationship for years and years before I ever had to work with him. And then we butted heads. And before I left, and that was, but he's one of those gung-ho. He does what I call a damage control sermon. He will regurgitate everything that 𝗪𝗧𝗏 has taught about a certain topic and then vomit it again all over the people in one concentrated sermon. And when he was doing that right before I left, and I'm like, this is not the man I thought he was. He's totally on board. And he would do manipulation and push things and tell you this and that. And it's like, that's not true. That's just what Dave Pack says. And so he became a soldier. So I called him Stepford Prime, like after Stepford Wives, because he's kind of like, he's become a robot. He's not the critical thinker that he once used to be. And that's really sad. So I have to point that out. And then, of course, there's Dr. 𝗪𝗏𝗀𝗀, a man from South Africa. And his family is just a wonderful family, charming wife, great kids. I've never seen a brother and sister get along so well as 𝗪𝗏𝗀𝗀𝗀's children. And he's a nice guy. He was nice to me. But then he started slipping in concepts in his sermons out of nowhere that gave support to Dave, and threw shade on the prophecy series. Oh, you need to forget what was just taught even a few weeks ago. You won't be able to grow past it. And I was showing by talking about other men besides David C. Pack that it's not just David C. Pack. It's the men underneath him who prop him up, who spill the propaganda and call it a sermon, who do damage control, who manipulate, who tell you one thing when the Bible says something else, and they just read right past it as if it didn't counter what they just said. And it's like they double speak. It is and it isn't, but it is because we say it is. Those kind of things I realized I couldn't just hold back on. So I had a personal challenge because I like these people. I would sit and have a beer with them. And, I have to weigh the fact that they're going to consider me an enemy, that I'm attacking them. And I don't feel that way because I'm not going after them personally. Again, I just said nice things about all of them, and that's all true. But at the same time, what they're doing is really wrong. And if they're supporting David C. Pack and his false prophecies and false teachings, those men are equally as culpable in the damage they're doing to people's lives, to hurting people as much as David C. Pack is. So I'm no longer squeamish about naming names, even though if they wanted to come after me, I think the growing crowd that would call me a serpent.
I think they know what they're doing is not right. I mean,
I'm sorry, say that again.
Do you think that these ministers, these people under David, realize what they're doing is wrong to these people?
No, of course not. Well, hold on. I think on some level they have to know, because if you read the Bible on a level, David Pack is false. And for all the ministers to agree about doctrine A, and then 3 weeks later it's doctrine B, and then 3 weeks later it's doctrine C, and they supported it with doctrine A, and then they supported it with doctrine B, and then they supported it with doctrine C. It's like, well, who are you kidding at this point? Are you kidding yourself? Why are you being so agreeable if something is malleable as the doctrines of God, and then you get out like a good little soldier and support it and hold the flag for it, it's like, what kind of person are you at that point? And what is your motivations? People often ask me, well, do you think they are this, and what's their motivation? It's like, I don't know people's hearts. I don't know their motivation. I know based on what I see, and I could make theories. Oh, it's about politics. Oh, it's about kissing, smooching the boss's butt kind of thing to get up in the world. But I can't just say it's black and white that way. I'm sure it's like all kinds of shades of gray with all the types of things that they're going through. And some people, Dr. 𝗪𝗠 is a citizen of South Africa. At least he was before I left. Man, if that guy stands up, quote unquote, stands up for the truth and tells Dave Pack, I got to quit, he and his family are going back to South Africa. So, without the green card or whatever kind of corporate support you have to stay in the country, some people are trapped. There's other ministers there, like he might be going back to Africa if he says, I'm not doing this anymore. People have to go back to Canada or whatever situation they have. So everybody has different things. You live on the campus and your wife is here and your kids are here and, things are nice. I'm getting a good paycheck. There's food on the table. It's like, is it really worth, fighting? It's going to go one way or the other at some point. So what the motivations of those men are, I don't know, but the end result is it's bad for people, and I'm going to write about it.
You know what? I don't want to speak for every church out there, but most churches have their leader, a pastor, reverend, whatever. If they leave or pass away, they have stuff in place, to keep the church going. And we've learned history-wise, at least with the Worldwide Church of God, when Armstrong passed away, eventually it went.
Right.
What do you think?
Because they changed
happen
the
but what do you think is going to happen to RCG? Because David Pack is up there in age, and he's the true one, so he's obviously not going to name anyone as his, successor.
Well, that is the $1 million question of what's going to happen in the future. And if I knew that, I'd have $1 million because I go to the, pony races. It's hard to say where you could talk about where it can go. And actually in a recent article, I said there were 3 options as to what's going on in the Restored Church of God. Number 1, God is behind this. Number 2, David C. Pack by himself is behind this. Or number 3, a dark spirit is behind this. And you can blend option 1 and 2 or option 2 and 3. And all of those could be true. What are the outcomes? I have my own personal thoughts as to what the man is doing, but that's just my theory. It's not a fact, and I don't know the man's heart. I've heard from sources very close to him that he's a true believer in what he says and does. He's adamant in praying, and he's fully into God's way. He's not a gambler, he's not a drinker. So he's a true believer. But at the same time, when you have narcissistic tendencies, and I can't diagnose him as a narcissist because I'm not a qualified professional, but when you can read on a website the tendencies of a narcissist and go, okay, that fits, that fits, that fits, that fits, you can only fail so many times until the human brain can no longer handle it. And since David C. Pack has such a long history of absolute pure failure, at some point, even the most delusional human being will have to look in the mirror sometime and think, wow, I'm a failure. And what I think I see is him cracking under that kind of reality, where even he'll set a date and then right at the end of his message, give himself an out. Maybe, I'm not sure, could be. It's like, didn't God give you this information? Why can't you get up on the hill like Moses and declare, cross the Red Sea, it's going to part right for us? Because he knows he's wrong. And there's a part of him and it's, I think, a growing part of David C. Pack's psyche, where he's realizing more and more how wrong he is. But he has all the support of all these people around him. And I think that's detrimental. It's like, I'm going to draw an analogy that I'm not saying it's David C. Pack, but I'm drawing an analogy of somebody who's schizophrenic. You're schizophrenic and you hear voices. And the people at the dinner table are telling you, oh yeah, I hear the voice too. Oh, the voice, what it just said is wonderful. Except they're, quote, normal human beings who know that there's no voice, but because, dad at the head of the table thinks he's hearing voices, and we got to say that because otherwise, he might get mad and whatever. And that's kind of what I see in Restored Church of God, that there is like a person who is schizophrenic, who hears voices and thinks he knows the truth. He's Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind, where he looks at a wall and sees all these connections and beautiful colors and lights, except that's happening in Restored, and yet it's in front of an audience. It's not just some dingy shack. It's actually a bunch of people trapped in the room seeing this magical man who has this wonderful gift of connecting the dots of the newspaper articles on the wall with all the gold and the swelling music. And it's like, it's all garbage. It's all fake, but they're all sitting there like, oh yeah, this is wonderful. So when you have a support system around you, people in the church and in headquarters in Wadsworth on the 3rd floor specifically, telling you, yes, Emperor, your clothes are beautiful, and yet you're stark naked, that creates a problem at some point. There's going to be some kind of psychotic crash. So the options of 𝗪𝗪𝗂𝗧 quitting, I don't think. He's not going to like cash in a check and then sell the campus and run off to the Caymans. He's not that kind of guy. Christ could return in our lifetime while 𝗪𝗪𝗂𝗧 is still around, but I guarantee you if that happens, it won't come when and how 𝗪𝗪𝗂𝗧 says. Or 𝗪𝗪𝗂𝗧 passes away, in which case, then what happens is a whole nother string of possibilities of what could happen. Or he continues. He'll just keep continuing and continuing and continuing and continuing till the function. He'll have more and more people offering support, more and more people to help put in the spackle of all the cracks of his psyche as failures continue and continue and continue and continue. And to me, that's the most likely scenario. 𝗪𝗪𝗂𝗧 will continue like he's been doing. He won't change course. He won't stop. He won't repent. He won't say, wow, I've made a huge mistake. I'm so sorry, everybody. Let's get back to the way we were in 2013, erase the last, 9, almost 10 years, get back to what Mr. Armstrong taught, get back to the roots of Christianity and wait for Christ to come. That would, to me, be the most wonderful and best outcome. But I don't think it's likely. I think that he will just continue until he can't physically continue anymore.
I know a lot of the community members, and even outside of Wadsworth, outside of the state, have wondered what's going to happen. Either somebody's going to take over and try to keep it going the same. What happens if it's like, after Armstrong passed away and they start changing things and, then you even more leave, or it's, they decide to sell the property, and I'd be like, great, please give it to me, because I would like it a home for veterans that are homeless and to rehabilitate them, get them jobs, right. Be a perfect place. But only God knows what's going to happen.
And that's what it comes down to, that only God knows where this is going. And I had to struggle with personally before I left Restored Church of God. Is God doing this? Is there something in the Bible that I can see that's a pattern that I'm not quite seeing? The answer right now is I don't know. I don't know what's going on. People will write to me and say, well, where should I go? And I'm like, if I knew where to go, I would be there. So don't ask me. I'm not the pillar of virtue. I'm not, standing up for the truth. I'm not, don't emulate what I'm doing and saying. But at the same time, I'm going to speak the truth as to the best of my ability humanly possible. I'm going to continue to expose what I see are inconsistencies and just flat out falsehoods that are being said in ministers, not just now 𝗪𝗪𝗂𝗧, but the other ministers too. People are sending me more and more sermons from this minister and that minister, and hey, you might want to listen to this. So, I might be writing about more and more people. But at the same time, it's like, let's just, can't we all just get along? I almost want to like Rodney King that, but, just getting RCG back to where it was when 𝗪𝗪𝗂𝗧 in his heart started it and rewrote the literature and, really wanted to, carry on the traditions of the Worldwide Church of God and keep the grand pattern going. He got derailed with prophecy. And prophecy is like heroin. It's like once you do it, shoot up once, you're now an addict. And 𝗪𝗪𝗂𝗧 is a prophecy addict. And he's a functioning addict because he has enablers who are, supporting him the whole time. I cannot stress that enough. It's not him by himself. He has a support system, but those people know who and what they're supporting. They're like, oh, he's an apostle. He's an apostle. It's like, okay, do you really believe that? Can you look at the New Testament pattern and say he's fulfilling this? I mean, he said recently he doesn't have dunamis. Dunamis is the Greek for power, but it's in the Bible, in the New Testament, it's miraculous power. And he admitted he doesn't do miracles. It's like, well, all the apostles had dunamis. And so in one of my articles, I even said, so if you had dunamis before, but you don't anymore, why would God take that away from you if you're his chosen apostle, chosen leader, the messenger to the seventh era? Why would God do that to you? Why would he handicap you? And that's an open-ended question, but it's a question that needs to be asked. And it's a question that all those ministers need to ask themselves. One of the points that I continue to make and will continue to make is David C. Pack, I'm going to write an article. He knows, I mean, he's telling you everything you need to hear to make a judgment call in his own words. I don't need to comment. I can point out, doesn't this mean this or doesn't mean that? But by his own words, he's telling you everything you need to know about whether or not he's a biblical fraud or not.
Now I know that you just stated that, he tells people what they need to hear. And I kind of feel like there are certain things that he obviously took from Armstrong. Mm-hmm. And then he kind of tweaked it to maybe make it a little bit better for members to want to join. Yeah. And one of it is which they talked about in the Unchosen or worldwide, the Unchosen Church podcast was about the British Israelism. They had kind of a different take that you hadn't heard before. Right. But it's basically like you can't do interracial marriage, but Pack was allowing if you're already interracially married, you can join the church. But once you're a member and you're not married or dating, you can't marry outside your race. And I'm kind of like, it's 2022. Isn't that a little racist? And in the podcast, I'm sure you could explain it better than me, but basically somebody as a sin or something was turned black. Can you explain that? I'm confused.
Well, the concept of British Israelism, it depends on if you're talking about what WCG and RCG and others have adopted, or the original core, which is how Herbert W. Armstrong discovered it, in the 30s or the 40s. The true British Israelism, which is that the identity of the 12 tribes are hidden. And we've got the Jews and the Levites that are known as Jews today, but then you have all the other tribes that are, people, Anglo-Caucasians of various Scandinavian countries, of Canada, the United States, England, Britain. So British Israelism is saying that the Israelites, they're tribes in Britain. And so that's kind of a little background for that. The racism part, I never heard any sermon ever, and Dave Pack gave a 6-hour sermon, I believe, about the truth about the races. What he taught was, and I think what you're referring to, was that one of the sons of Noah was cursed by being turned black after he saw Noah naked. Now, I never heard that before. I never read it in any of the literature. I don't believe that's anything that RCG teaches. And who knows, maybe even the later years of Herbert W. Armstrong, he walked away from that, because I never remember hearing about that or reading that in anything. All it is basically saying is that the 12 tribes of Israel are hidden today. 10 of the 12 tribes are hidden today, and it's Canada, United States, Britain, Canada, United States, Iceland, all other countries. I don't have the list in front of me, but that's kind of the extent I knew. But I've never heard about, God cursing a race. What I heard was that the sons of Noah already had interracially married with people in the world before the flood, an Asian, a Black, and Hispanic. And that's kind of how the races came through the flood, that everybody's not white like Noah was. So that's to the extent I know about it. But the interracially marriage, now allowing it or not allowing it, that is kind of a worldwide thing where they wouldn't let you interracially date or marry, but RCG doesn't break up a marriage. If you're already married when you come here, fine, because there are tons of interracial couples. But it's an interesting slippery slope, because the church has to decide. It's like, what if one parent is Chinese and the other parent is Caucasian and they want to date or marry? Well, can they only date whites or can they only date Caucasians? I'm sorry, only date whites or only date Asians? And it becomes this weird thing. Like I have a buddy, a really good friend of mine who's Black and Korean. And they told him, you have to pick one. And he was like, I got to pick one. Like I have to pick the race before I meet the person. And that doesn't make any sense. What happens if you meet this wonderful Asian lady and you want to date her, or you meet this wonderful Black lady and you want to date her? And it's like, once you choose one side, you can never go back. Like, okay, I dated this Black lady and that didn't work out. Now the church says I can only date Blacks from here on out. And it's like, that's not in the Bible. That's nowhere in the Bible. If you're already kind of loosening what the judgment call is, it gets into like a really hairy thing. And so I know
what is the baseline of not interracially marrying or dating? Why?
Because God separated the tribes with Moses in the desert when Israel wandered for 40 years. You had all the mixed multitude and all the different people who were trapped in Egypt as slaves once they became free and chose to go God's way and chose to go with Moses, Miriam, and Aaron into the desert. Now we're going to separate the 12 tribes, and you will not marry between tribes. And if these were people of the same race, let's say Caucasian, but yet one is tribe of Reuben and the other is the tribe of Asher, they didn't want them to marry because then it blurs the tribes, and God wanted clear separation of the 12 tribes of Israel. And so that's where that mentality comes from. And that's all biblical. That's not 𝗪𝗃𝗃 making stuff up.
I feel kind of like when I saw there's a picture of 𝗪𝗃𝗃, he's holding the book. And when I first saw it, I thought it was a Confederate flag. I didn't know what it was. And for him to sit there, I feel it's racist. I also feel that it's like,
I'm going to put you on the spot. Did you watch the broadcast America and Britain in Prophecy on World to Come?
Yes, I watched it, but I still you were on the inside, I'm on the outside. And
right.
I still feel that shouldn't be there, you know?
Yeah, but that's because your heathen brain cannot handle the things of God, Don Blue.
I'm a heathen.
Technically, yes, you are. Of course you are. Although I'm worse.
My dad won't like that.
I'm worse because now I'm an antichrist, according to the church. So would you rather be a heathen or an antichrist?
I don't know. What do you all want to be? Now,
see, that's what the Bible doesn't teach. Just come as you are and be everything you want to be. I know that is not biblical.
So that fire. Did I get it right?
What?
Lake of fire?
That's where I'm headed if I lost the Holy Spirit. It's not a fun idea.
Well, there was one other thing. You had a copyright issue.
I did. I posted a snippet of one of 𝗪𝗃𝗃's sermons and put it in a website article as an illustration or a sample of what the wackiness that was going on. And so, which I knew in YouTube that you can actually have a copyright strike, but I knew what I was using was legal under fair use. And so I kind of took a risk and just said, well, I'm going to do this anyways and see what happens. And then of course, 2 weeks later, I got a copyright strike with YouTube. And if you fight it, there's a very scarily worded message you get from Facebook that you're beginning legal proceedings and that federal law, blah, blah, blah. But I knew what I was doing was qualified under fair use. So I went ahead and fought it. And then the strike got taken back because what I didn't know was the way YouTube works is that if you get a copyright strike against you, they knee-jerk reaction, they take your video down. They give you time to respond to the copyright strike. What action do you want to take? Delete the video, or do you fight it? And I chose to fight it. I slept on it and I thought, you know what I'm doing is not wrong. It's not illegal. I'm legally allowed to use it the way I used it. So I fought it. And from that point on, the copyright holder has 10 business days to file a lawsuit against you. And if they do not, the video is reinstated. So RCG opted to not file a copyright lawsuit against me. So YouTube reinstated the video. So I've found that if I do that and I'm holding up to the law and not doing anything illegal, then I'm well within my rights to push back. And they could still keep putting copyright strikes against them, but I'll just keep fighting them with the exact same copy and paste reason that I did before, because that's all I'm doing. I'm just using it for a critique for educational purposes. So I saw it as a shot across the bow from them, like, hey, we're going to push back. We know that you're there and we're going to push back. But I pushed back too and said I didn't do anything wrong, which is like in these articles, if I ever had to face Brad Schleifer or Ed Wingfield or Dr. Phil Yoon or Dave Pack, after had to sit down and face them and said, you lied about this, I never want those words to be able to come out of their mouth, because I would say, well, where did I lie and what did I lie about? Because I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. But no, it's not true. I'm not lying about it. So I want to be able to face these people again, maybe uncomfortably, but at least they wouldn't say that I was a liar.
Now, we have spun off because unless there's like a lot of something new, this episode 5 is probably going to sit for a while if there's a 6, because just the content. But we started the cult section, the breakdown, basically because it's like people are loosely using the word cult. And we're not saying one way or another if Worldwide Church of God or the Restored Church of God is a cult. We are discussing it in a breakdown. And we already have episode 1. We'll be doing the second episode in regards to a breakdown of what is an authoritarian leader. How is your stance after hearing the podcasts to now, in your opinion, of RCG?
In regards to it being a cult or not a cult?
Yeah.
Not a cult. Some people who leave instantly call it a cult when they walk out the door. Some people take a few years or a few months to come to that conclusion. I don't feel like it's a cult. I don't think that it technically applies, as we talked about in our first interview with them. I don't think I'm in denial about saying that I worked for a cult for almost 9 years. It's nothing like that. It doesn't quite fit. It's actually in some ways, I think, worse, because it's kind of in that gray area between a cult and not a cult, but it's still bad. It's still hurting people spiritually, emotionally, financially, mentally. It's not where God is working. And if he is in a way, then I'm completely oblivious to it. And that could very well be the case. And I have to admit that. But I don't see RCG as a cult. I don't think they're a cult. When people call them a cult, on Facebook, well, what am I going to do? I'm not going to convince them otherwise. So I don't feel that they are a cult, and I don't feel comfortable saying that. And maybe 5 years down the road, when I'm had therapy, I'll go lay on the couch and go, oh, they're a cult. I finally get it. But I don't see that. I
commend you for that. When we started this, it was really to get what was true and what was untrue out there. And also, I feel a pull towards the members. It's like,
oh yeah,
things are being said about them, and I look at them as they're just trying to do the right thing, by God. And I don't feel that I have the authority, or anyone has an authority, to label somebody as a cult, because that's like a pretty heavy word. It's like calling
racist.
Somebody, a racist, a bigot,
Right.
And I want to leave it up to the experts, which I have contacted to, observe. They're very, very specific how they do it, because if I was to end up in court and had to justify calling a church a cult, you have to be able to justify that and back it up, which I can't.
Legally, you'd have to back it up.
Yeah. And so that's why I leave it up to the experts, the ones that, have helped the government, have been in court, TV, done the research. That's why I don't. And I know that I wouldn't say been attacked, but been accused of, being a sympathizer, a mole.
Yeah, if you don't adamantly
things.
attack something, you're secretly a mole and you're for it.
Yeah,
I'm only
and
criticizing them just to lull you in, to jab you with, haha, they're really,
and then also attacking the city as to why they allowed it and didn't shut it down. And
it's a legitimate business. They're not doing anything illegal in the Restored Church of God. Nothing they're doing is illegal.
Or why doesn't the city go in? And it's like, this has nothing to do with the city. If they were doing anything wrong, I guarantee you the IRS would be there. But
if the city went in and did anything, it would be international news about how the government stepped on a church, regardless of their beliefs.
Yeah, and it's like, it's not about allowing them, like we talked to Chamber. They don't have the authority to say who can come. They went through everything legal. I think it's just the fact that, people want to assume if you defend, and it's kind of like, what I see the issue really is not with the members. They're not doing any crazy 𝗪𝗂𝗏 or Applewhite stuff. It is the authoritarian leader, 𝗪𝗪𝗂𝗏𝗀, that is the issue. And
his supporters.
Yeah, and
I'll keep throwing that in.
Yeah, and that's like, I think the overall take why we're trying to do the education on the cult series. And we're not going to say one way or the other, because I'm not licensed to do that. People can say it on their own, and most are just going to be like, whatever, cult. But I would like to tell viewers, remember, there are real human beings inside that organization. There are real human beings that left that organization or in others like that. Yeah. And to criticize them for, why did you not leave? Why did you allow this? You were in a cult. You have to take yourself a step back and remember, everybody's different. There are those who stay in a domestic violence situation, those that have had trauma with PTSD. It is a lot. And so it is not our place to go ahead and judge these members. I really want to create an environment to educate the outsiders so that those that are on the inside don't fear coming out and leaving, that they know that they're going to be supported, that their service is for them, and the community is going to be there for them, and not be like, why were you in a cult? That's not our place, and it's not the city's place to step in. The city is doing what they got to do. And therefore I'm leaving it up to the experts. Now, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but I'm just saying, please keep in mind, these are human beings that, some are going through a lot, and they are trying to do the right thing by what they believe in God. And when you say, how can they believe that? It's the same as somebody saying, how can you be a Republican, or how can you be a Democrat, or how can you be, So I think that's a personal thing, and it's not for us to judge. But you have created, I think, an environment. I've watched it grow, and I think it's amazing, because a lot more people are reaching out, not just in this community or in this state. I mean, we're talking out there, and slowly but surely, even though there haven't been others that have come forward to tell their stories, we are still stating, listen, if you don't want to show your face, we won't show your identity. If you need your voice changed, we'll do that. But
you'll do that. I won't do that.
but I do think that you're creating a good environment to keep the timelines there, and basically give a place. Yeah,
people informed and up to date, and be a log of the history of what's been done before.
Yeah, and it's not an attack on them. I think it's more of giving tools for former members and for current members to look at. It's the truth. It's from 𝗪𝗪𝗂𝗏𝗀 himself, I encourage everyone to go to the worldwide Unchosen Church of God podcast. They're not very long like us, but They're very informative. They have a lot of different people that are talking about, their church, and you can hear Kevin Denis. He was very articulate. I loved his because he wasn't being mean about it. He just spoke the truth.
He's a nice guy. He's not an attacker.
And so it will kind of tie in all the stuff that we have been going over. Go support them. And we thank you guys for watching. I thank you, Mark, for taking the time. And I know that it's been very hard. It's been a bumpy road from the beginning to now with people and their opinions. But you've done a really good job and created an outlet for people. And your healing process, I think that's your healing process. And I don't know if you were meant to go through all this to be there to help people, but I really feel that this is part of your calling is to help the aftermath. So I want to say thank you to everybody for watching the show. Please make sure you go ahead and you support your small and local businesses. Remember, they are the bread and butter of your community. Please make sure if you haven't seen any of the other videos, go ahead and watch them. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us. I can get you in contact with Mark. And until next time, have a great day.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.